If you're listening to this alone, you might want to turn the lights on first. Because the stories you're about to hear are not urban legends, creepypastas, or internet fiction. They're real experiences, told by real people, who found themselves in situations so disturbing. From a funeral gathering, a taxi ride, to even a military operation that should have been a routine. Because sometimes, the most horrifying stories start out completely normal. And the first one begins in Dublin, Ireland. Back in the early 1990s, a man named Shawn was working private security while chasing another dream, becoming a professional boxer. Like many young fighters trying to make it into the professional circuit, he needed a job that paid the bills between fights. Private security seemed like a perfect fit. Most nights, the job was exactly what you'd expect. Standing outside bars, breaking up drunken arguments, escorting unruly customers out of nightclubs, occasionally guarding a building that needed extra protection for a few hours. But every once in a while, something unusual came up. One week he was assigned to guard a church after protesters started harassing people attending services. Another time, he and his team were hired to watch over a nursery school after someone began making disturbing threats toward the children. Still, none of those assignments compared to the strangest job Shawn would ever receive. Providing security at a funeral. And not just any funeral. The funeral of one of Dublin's most powerful crime bosses. The man they called Big Fitz. Even people who had nothing to do with crime knew the Fitz family by reputation. They were wealthy, feared, and deeply connected throughout the city. When Big Fitz died, everyone expected the funeral to be enormous. But more importantly, everyone expected trouble. Because when powerful criminal families gather in one place, especially while grieving, emotions run high. Old grudges resurface. Tempers flare. And sometimes, violence follows. So Shawn and several other guards were hired to protect the Fitz family mansion, where the wake would take place after the burial. When Shawn arrived that morning, he was stunned by what he saw. The property looked less like a family home, and more like a castle. Expensive cars lined the driveway. Luxury SUVs pulled up one after another. Inside the house, everything gleamed with wealth. Designer clothing, polished shoes, gold watches catching the light as people moved through the rooms. It looked less like a wake, and more like a gathering of celebrities. But beneath all that wealth, there was tension. Because nearly everyone there had some connection to Dublin's criminal underworld. At first, everything followed the pattern of a typical Irish wake. People cried. They hugged one another. They shared stories about the man they had just buried. Drinks were poured. Voices softened as memories were exchanged. For the first couple of hours, nothing unusual happened. But slowly, the mood began to change. The drinks flowed more freely. Music started playing somewhere in the house. Laughter began replacing tears. By mid-afternoon, the gathering had transformed from mourning into something that felt almost like a party. Some of the guards even started joking among themselves. They had expected chaos. Instead, they were dealing with drunk relatives and middle-aged women flirting with them. At one point, Shawn even joked that the most dangerous part of the job might be surviving the attention of a few overly friendly widows. But then, something happened outside. A voice crackled through the radio. One of the guards stationed near the back of the property sounded tense. There was banging on the fence. Loud banging. Metal striking wood. Then a curse. And suddenly, silence. Shawn exchanged a look with another guard. Without saying a word, they both started running toward the backyard. They arrived just in time to see something they would never forget. A man dressed completely in black, swinging a sledgehammer into the wooden fence. The boards shattered apart. And behind him, a group of about a dozen men poured through the opening. Every single one of them dressed the same. Black clothing, black gloves, black balaclavas covering their faces. And in their hands, weapons. Baseball bats, crowbars, hammers, heavy clubs. Shawn felt his stomach drop. None of the security guards had firearms. At best, they carried small defensive tools meant to deal with unruly bar patrons. Not an organized group of armed attackers. So instead of trying to fight them directly, they made a quick decision. Get everyone inside. Women and children were rushed toward the house. Doors were slammed shut. People were pushed upstairs toward safer rooms. But one of the back doors was made of glass. And glass doesn't stand a chance against a sledgehammer. The attackers smashed straight through it. The moment they entered the house, everything exploded into chaos. Some of the men from the Fitz family assumed the intruders were just another rival group looking for a drunken brawl. Fueled by alcohol and anger, they charged forward. But they quickly realized something terrifying. The attackers weren't there for a fist fight. They were armed. Within seconds, the hallway turned into a brutal melee. Masked men swarmed anyone who tried to resist. Clubs swung through the air. Bats cracked against bone. Men were knocked to the ground and beaten mercilessly. The sounds inside the house were horrifying. Bones snapping. Glass shattering. People screaming. Shawn and the other guards struggled desperately to move women and children upstairs, away from the violence. But the attackers kept pushing deeper into the house. Eventually, they reached the staircase. And that's when something completely unexpected happened. Upstairs, one of the elderly women from the Fitz family disappeared into the master bedroom. For a moment, no one knew what she was doing. Then she came back carrying something long, wrapped in cloth. Weapons. Real weapons. Apparently Big Fitz had been a collector of historical artifacts. And among his collection were several ancient blades. A samurai sword. 2 Zulu short spears. And a massive broadsword said to date back hundreds of years. The guards grabbed them. They formed a defensive line across the staircase. Spears pointed downward. Blades ready. And suddenly, the attackers stopped. Because the situation had changed. Instead of frightened victims, they now faced a group of defenders holding deadly weapons. For a few seconds, everything froze. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, chaos erupted again. Because the women upstairs had decided they weren't going to sit quietly. They began throwing anything they could find down the staircase. High heels. Marble statues. Heavy ashtrays. Decorative objects. Anything solid enough to hurt someone. One large glass ashtray came flying down the stairs and smashed directly into one attacker's head. He collapsed instantly. The remaining attackers suddenly realized something. This was no longer an easy target. They might still win the fight, but not without serious injuries. Between the spears blocking the staircase and the barrage raining down from above, the risk was rising fast. Slowly, the attackers began backing away, step by step, until finally, they retreated through the house and fled back through the broken fence. When it was over, the house looked like a war zone. Men lay unconscious across the floor. Several had broken arms, broken ribs, broken legs. One man had suffered such a severe skull fracture that his eye had partially popped from its socket. Paramedics arrived soon after. Police followed. And although the attackers had concealed their faces, everyone understood exactly what had happened. A rival criminal family had planned the attack. The funeral had simply been the perfect opportunity. But that wasn't the end of the story. Months later, members of that rival gang began turning up dead throughout Dublin, one by one. And after realizing just how close his job had brought him to the criminal underworld, Shawn made a decision. He quit. Because surviving one nightmare was enough to convince him to walk away forever. Now before we move on to the next story, if you're enjoying these real-life stories and want to hear more experiences that sound almost too unbelievable to be true, take a second to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who enjoys chilling true stories. Because the next story proves something truly unsettling. Sometimes, the most dangerous people look like victims. In the early 1990s, a taxi driver in Modesto, California had just started his Friday night shift when he noticed a young woman standing beside the road, hitchhiking. She looked shaken. Her voice trembled when she spoke. She said she had just broken up with her boyfriend and needed to get to the airport. She wanted to fly to Florida, where her grandparents lived. But there was a problem. She didn't have any money. The driver felt sorry for her. So he offered to give her the ride for free. As they drove, she began telling her story. She had moved across the country for college. During school she met a man, and after graduation she moved in with him while she searched for work. At first the relationship seemed perfect. But slowly, things changed. Arguments became more frequent. Tension grew. And eventually, the relationship turned violent. Hearing this made the taxi driver angry. His own father had been abusive. So he understood exactly how frightening that situation could be. He even suggested reporting the boyfriend to the police. That's when something shifted. The woman suddenly became extremely defensive. She insisted they just go to the airport. No police. No questions. Then she said something that made the driver's stomach drop. He's not going to hurt anyone anymore. The words hung in the air. The driver asked carefully what she meant. And that's when he heard something in the back seat. A small, metallic sound. A click. A very familiar sound. The sound of a handgun being cocked. He looked into the rearview mirror and saw the woman holding a gun. Her voice trembled again as she spoke. Just keep driving. Don't ask questions. In that moment, the driver realized something horrifying. The woman he thought he was rescuing might have just killed someone. And if he made the wrong move, he might be next. He drove the rest of the way in silence. When they reached the airport area, she ordered him to stop the car. Then she demanded his keys. At first he hesitated. But when she pressed the barrel of the gun directly against his temple, he handed them over. She stepped out of the taxi, pulled her suitcase from the trunk, and disappeared into the airport crowd. The driver waited until she was out of sight, before running to a payphone and calling the police. But by the time officers arrived, she was gone, vanished into the sea of travelers, possibly already on a plane. The driver never saw her again, and to this day, he still doesn't know whether the man she left behind that night was alive or dead. Stories like these remind us that danger rarely looks the way we expect. Sometimes it hides behind masks, sometimes it arrives unexpectedly, and sometimes it sits quietly in the backseat of your car. If these stories gave you chills, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves real stories that sound stranger than fiction. Because the world is full of them. Stories that seem impossible, until you realize they actually happened.